So the question is, though, what is that syndrome called where you hear music in your ears? 'Cause it's not cutards, it's another one. So anyway, if you know, can you tell us?
I wish I knew.
Oh, well, good morning. Welcome to Shambles Stay at Home Festival. We're just dealing with different kind of interesting, I suppose, neuroscientific and psychological intrigues. Cutards is, I think, or cotards, I'm not sure which. That's the one where you actually believe that you're dead. But that's a quite intriguing one. But anyway, this is the penultimate show. We're being a little bit more relaxed. Josie only a moment ago was debating whether to do the show in her vest, and we said not yet.
Not good enough.
Not good enough.
No.
So how are you this morning, Josie?
I am absolutely fine. I played some dinosaur puzzles this morning, and I also played a game where you put some boots on some monsters. So I've been really, and that was just me.
Brilliant. You pulled back, you revealed. It was, which of course, mine's fine. Mine has been one of those days. I've just been wasting time doing bits and pieces and watching a little bit of the Old Dark House. And my son's homeschooling involves a sketch with Stephen Fry, Ronnie Corbett, and Ronnie Barker this morning. So of course, I was contextualising it for him. Father, I don't need this contextualised. No, but let me tell you about the history of comedy. Father, I really don't need this. This is not.
That was the week it was. Now, alas, the 1968.
I think Humphrey Carpenter's take on that was best. Anyway, welcome to the show. This is the penultimate daily show. I'll quickly tell you who we've got coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow, we thought we'd have some of our favourite guests back. So, amongst others, we have David McCollman, and he is singing a very, very good song as well. We have Natalie Haynes, and we have our first guest, and he was also our middle guest, and he is now our final guest. Mark Gatiss is going to be joining us as well. And we also have Deanna Roger as well, who's going to be also singing some songs for us and doing some music stuff. Tell you a couple of things. One is we've got a new Patreon funding thing, which we just started on Thursday, and that's all gone up. And it's just so because we do genuinely, we don't like the idea of things not being accessible. And we've tried to make things free to access as much as possible, but because basically there is no live gigging, there is no touring, and all of that is gone for the moment. We are just changing the model a little bit, and there are going to be some shows now which are going to be Patreon only. We are still going to be making free to access shows. There's still going to be the Sunday Science Q&A and Quarantine Comedy Club, and at least one other thing as well. But some of the other stuff we are going to do for Patreon only. So if you can support us with that, that is fantastic. Josie, you're doing your show tonight?
My stomach just gurgled. Yes, I am. 8:30 till 10:30 p.m. on twitch.tv/Josie_long or on this very link. And that is free to access. Free to access is so... It's like such a secret lion in the background, isn't it? Free to access. Yeah. But will it ever be free? In-game purchases. But yeah, I do my stand-up show in two halves. We do a little interval in the middle, and I basically perform it as live, but try to perform it for this, not just me doing it. And hopefully it's been quite fun. I've been really enjoying doing it, and good. I'm going to keep doing it for the time being, but I suppose by the end of June I'm going to have to start writing a new show somehow, but I don't know how to do that without the stage.
Yeah, no, that's I find it. I kind of get very. Yesterday we recorded the first Monkey Cage back, and it was good. I don't know if I'm allowed to say who was on yet, but we have one of my favourite all-time comedy actors on. I mean, like really. I mean, in fact, we have two of them. We have two people who, in terms of my childhood and growing up, were two of the most influential comedy things ever.
This is so interesting because
it really is so cool as well.
Who are they?
I know you'll find out. I don't know when we're allowed to say who it is. I think we probably are allowed to say now, but I'm not going to anyway because I like to be enigmatic.
Mate, you didn't say who won Celebrity Pointless for nearly 2 years. I'm not going to get it out of you.
Was it who won? Oh yeah, it was me. It was me.
Robin,
you've done that as my show and tell.
Is our show tomorrow?
That has to be tomorrow's show and tell. I've never shown my Celebrity Pointless Award, my great trophy.
Listen, tomorrow, what time's the show? Is it 10 or 10:30?
10 o'clock tomorrow because we've got 4 guests and we'll be doing our final show and tells. There will be show and tells next week as well. Have you got? Oh, I should quickly mention this: the Albert Hall gig as well. Don't forget that again. It is free on Saturday night. It's Sunday night. Apologies, Sunday night. It's the gig that we would have been doing at the Albert Hall, but now with even more guests. So we've got Kobe Smulders from who's an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., as you may well know from the Marvel Avengers movies and How I Met Your Mother. And we have Chris Hadfield, and we have Lem Cisse, and we have Helen Chersky, we have Grace Petrie, and we have Josie Long, and we have British Sea Power, and we have loads of other things as well. My show and tell today, by the way, is I was going to do 2, but this is just because Florian Schneider died last week from Kraftwerk, who's such an incredible band, and this is a film which I'm always surprised at how few people have seen this, and it's called Radio On. I'm sure I probably mentioned it before, and it was late 70s it came out. Chris Pettit, and it's just this. It's a really great British road movie.
Another comedian was talking about this yesterday on Twitter. Somebody else was saying they absolutely love it because it's. Who was talking about it?
It's mainly just a car. It's a man driving while you hear the entirety of songs by people like Kraftwerk, and it's beautifully shot. And there's some people who are J.G. Ballard fans as well will love the fact there's beautiful shots on the Westway as well, and it's an incredible. There's the kind of opening scene. There's a beautiful, just very lengthy panning shot with the David Bowie's version of Heroes, which is half English and half German version as well. But it is a really incredible film, and it's a beautiful use of Kraftwerk. So Radio On is my show and tell because and it is.
Alistair Green. Do you know Alistair Green?
Yeah, he's hilarious. If you haven't watched Alistair Green's monologues that he makes in his house, normally on a daily basis, they are absolutely brilliant. He is one of the funniest men in the world.
So funny. Well, he, the other day, was recommending the very same film, so you should get in contact and have a nice long chat about it. The Absolute Dream.
He'll just lampoon me with a monologue about a middle-aged idiot going on about late 1970s new wave British road movies yet again. Have you got a show and tell today, Josie?
I do. So Johnny brought Johnny. When me and Johnny he was like, really have any stuff? And I was like, wow, how enigmatic. But it turned out he had lots of stuff hidden at various friends' attics. And so gradually it would come back bag by bag. And there was a bag of unsorted stuff. And he sorted it, and most of it was just old stuff he didn't want and stuff like that. But we kept this, which is, I'd never seen it before, and I didn't realise it existed. And I think it's the bleakest book I've ever seen. One is fun. One is fun. Then it's the #1 bestseller, which is sad, but it's all about how to cook yourself. I mean, I guess it's not bleak. I think it's beautiful. It's lovely. I shouldn't say it's bleak. It's too easy a laugh to say it's bleak. But you can make yourself cheese, sage, and onion sausages, Florentine eggs, chicory, orange, and walnut salad. So it's all about treating yourself right, even if it's just you. So
but there is, I know what you mean. There's something. I think it's because of the use of the word "fun." Yeah. In the same way that a fun pub had no fun in it. The idea that saying it's all right, one's fun. It's fun, isn't it? I mean, we're having fun, aren't I? Yeah, I think that's it. If it was just cooking for yourself, brilliant. It's fun. I'm bloody glad I'm a no.
Treat yourself.
Yeah,
you'd be like, yeah, I will treat myself, but it's like, no, it's not just that. We're having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, this flyer was in the middle of it. Elton John tribute show, Crocodile Mock, at the Harlow Playhouse, Saturday, 6th of June, 2015. If anyone's got a time machine.
That is brilliant. Has he got a beard?
No, he hasn't.
Huh.
So that's that sorted.
Good. I was just thinking he might be one of those George Michael tribute acts who also goes, and I can do him as well. But that means you've got to keep the beard. I know it's a problem. Anyway, so that is. I'm looking forward to that. When is that again? What day are we going to see Crocodile Mock?
It's at the Harlow Playhouse, Saturday, 6th of June, 2015.
Brilliant. See you there. See you, everyone. And we'll be putting up the full details of that gig. So if you all want to meet up after this, we will do that using some kind of wormhole or quantum tunneling or something like that. Anyway, we're going to now have guest of the day, who unfortunately it turns out yet again Josie is allergic to. It seems she sneezed instantaneously.
Also, I'm sorry, I got so excited for your show and tell to tell you that Alistair Green also liked it. It's because before we started the show, when I said, "Oh, it must feel sad that others of your friends don't know it," and then it just seemed so perfect. But that was before the show.
Well, I was saying that, yeah. When I tour with Brian Cox, just everything that I bring up, he goes, "No one's heard of it. No one knows what it is because it's not part of the Marvel or Star Wars franchise."
Basic.
Now, Mark O'Connell, who is our guest today, whose first book was about transhumanism, which is a fascinating area, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his latest book, which is Notes from an Apocalypse. And this is... Well, Mark, hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, Robin. Hi, Josie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm all right.
Now we were saying beforehand that, of course, every review has talked about the timing of this book coming out, but it's not. I mean, what you're actually looking at is a very kind of it's a lot of different versions of ideas of people, how they are thinking ahead, isn't it, to actually some form of possible human apocalypse.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of premise of the book is that, well, it sort of begins out of my own sort of formless anxiety about, climate change and the sort of sense of political fragmentation and everything just going to sort of chaos. And I then sort of channel that into a bit of an unhealthy obsession with like doomsday preppers, people who are convinced that some sort of, civilizational collapse event is on the way and are preparing for it by, digging bunkers and stockpiling tinned goods and all that kind of stuff. And then it sort of opens out onto people building luxury bunkers for the super rich, people like Peter Thiel buying land in New Zealand. So it's an examination of like the various ways in which people are preparing for the end of the world as a sort of way for me to metabolize my own anxieties and talk about things that interest and terrify me.
So Peter Thiel, that's very interesting because I think, is it right? New Zealand has had to change some of its laws because it said too many people since 2016 have been going, our culture's gone absolutely terrible. We must immediately buy property in New Zealand. This is it's become this kind of imagined place where this is to escape from the rest of the madness. And especially when you see their prime minister, you go, oh, whenever in New Zealand, you go, oh, this seems to offer so much political hope as well.
Yeah, I mean, they've changed the laws since I was sort of even writing about it. But even at the time, Peter Thiel had to go through some fairly kind of had to go through some loopholes to buy that land in the first place. He had to become a citizen because the laws were already quite tight around foreign ownership of land. But I think since then, they've completely clamped down on foreigners buying land. And
that's what Britain could be like, but it never will. Britain will always just be a money laundering operation.
Right.
Do you find it? I find it so interesting with things like this, and it does. It links back to me a little bit to when people are pregnant. They often prepare for the birth, but they don't prepare for parenthood. And similarly with this, I feel like people's attitudes, and maybe it's a result of the last sort of 20 years of specific types of dystopia and doomsday fiction, but I feel like people are so prepared for the event and not prepared for life. So they're not prepared for things to get difficult and stay difficult. They're prepared for there'll be a one night battle with zombies and it'll be like a film. And once you've won that, I don't want to plan ahead. And so it's this strange sort of prepper mentality is not necessarily a long-term mentality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like in some ways it's a way of avoiding.
Yes, truly.
Everyday life. Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the weird things about I spent 2.5 years writing this book. And I, like I said, I began out of kind of similar anxieties to the anxieties of the people I'm writing about. My politics are very different, obviously, but, I get where they're coming from in terms of the sense of the fragility of the world and all that kind of stuff. But I never did any actual preparing. I mean, the amount of time I spent watching YouTube videos of guys talking through their bug out bags and sort of their various preparations and thinking through the scenarios of things that might happen, the various ways in which civilization might be fragile and so on. None of that actually amounted to me doing anything. None of that amounted to me actually even going so far as to have a little bag under the bed or whatever. So I'm not wired in that way. But I think you're right in saying that, like, there is something about it that is like, it's as much about fantasy as it is about fear, I think, because the fantasy that so many of these people have of the apocalypse, quote unquote, is one of like, okay, there's a catastrophe, like the government collapses, you're on your own, and all of a sudden life becomes like at once very chaotic but also very simplified, and it's just you against the elements, it's you against the sort of savage hordes outside, and it becomes this kind of like, you know, masculinity fulfillment kind of fantasy in a way. And that's part of what I found really interesting about it. So I think, like, even though my fears in some ways coincide with those of these people, it never amounted to actually preparing. Because I'm not like, I think that the thing that I did was write the book, actually. The thing that I did with my anxieties was write the book. And as I say in the book, like, if there is some kind of, you know, apocalyptic event, I would hope to be in the first wave of death. That's my contingency plan. Just go down first.
Honestly, because this is the other thing. You put all your energy into surviving the first bit, and then it'll be much harder afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit like childbirth and parenting, actually.
Yes, truly. The first bit is just like a strength thing, and then the rest is endurance, which is unbearable.
Yeah. If there's one thing that prepares you for the apocalypse, maybe it is parenting.
Yeah.
I can't
Constantly woken.
Of childbirth, but yeah.
Full alert when the baby can move things but can't understand consequences. You're basically got death around the corner at any stage.
Surrounded by savages.
Yeah.
Did you find that for quite a few of these people, it does become a secular religion? It does become, this is, you know, in the same way when you think of some of those cults that are waiting for the mothership, or you think of those that are waiting for what might be seen as the rapture, that this idea of some form of human apocalypse and to focus this entire focus on how will the community work and how will you be, you know, the emperor of that community and all of those different things, that does in some way fulfill some kind of bleak religious need as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, in a similar way to my first book, I suppose, I look at, you know, transhumanism in the first book, and one of my sort of readings of that whole sort of desire to, you know, bring about eternal life through technology is that it's really a kind of a diversion of the religious urge into technology and science. And I think with the, you know, sort of notion of the secular apocalypse that I'm looking at in this book, there are kind of religious, you know, it's an essentially religious form. And so if you're convinced that some kind of apocalyptic event is going to happen, it's in a way, it's a way of containing and giving coherence to a lot of very incoherent and sort of like vague anxieties about the fragility of the world and the sense of like chaos outside. I mean, one of the things about the apocalypse as an idea, like a mythology, for want of a better term, is that, like, if you look at the history of sort of moments of apocalyptic fervor or whatever, it always seems to crop up at times of like particular upheaval, and at times when like society seems to be going through chaotic changes and nobody knows what the future is going to bring, and everything seems to be changing really, really fast. I mean, if you look at the Book of Revelation, probably tells you a lot more about the time it was written and the sort of like religious persecutions and sort of wars and like upheavals of empires and so on that were going on at the time than it does about any kind of, you know, possible future or whatever. And I think similarly now, the apocalypse is a way, it's almost like in a way that's sort of actually similar to conspiracy theories in a sense, that like the world is like vastly complicated. No one knows what they're doing. The people who control the levers of power are barely cognizant of what they're doing. They don't really have much of a plan. They're just kind of out for themselves. Nothing makes much sense, you know? Whereas if you've got a conspiracy theory, it sort of simplifies everything. And similarly with the apocalypse, it sort of focuses everything into this one sort of narrative endpoint, you know? The future is all of a sudden clear and certain. And I think there's an appeal to that is quite similar to the appeal of, you know, the religious idea of the apocalypse, which is that, okay, everything, humanity has got out of control. Everything's gone completely chaotic. God is going to step in. Jesus is going to return. Everything's going to make sense. It's all going to get wrapped up.
Josie, I'll tell you what, we'll come back to this because we're going to take a brief break from the apocalypse and have the first.
If only we could, Robin.
Well, it's all very parochial because I was saying yesterday the monkey cage we were doing was all about how the universe is going to end. So this feels like a very relaxed chat. This is no big rip or vacuum decay that's about to suddenly take us by surprise. So we're joined by a singer, songwriter, and poet, and she's recorded two poems, and it is Arlo Parks. So let's have a look at the work of Arlo Parks.
Hi everyone, my name is Arlo Parks. I'm a 19-year-old artist from West London. My music is a blend of soul, R&B, rock, indie and pop. A lot of the songs that I write come from poetry. Poetry is my first love. I've been writing poems and writing stories since I was very, very young. The first poem I want to read for you guys is a poem called Brilliant Corners. I feel like in this time, there's a sense of nostalgia, there's a sense of reflecting on people that were once very important to you and reflecting on past loves. There is a brilliant corner in me that I have saved for you. That is to say, I have embroidered every conversation we have ever had, every brutal confession of comfort with dark purple silk. You came to me as a string of pearls, around the neck of a long winter, sweet-tempered and firm. I remember every one of your habits by accident, the smashed tumbler of vodka, the David Lynch marathons, the snatched lunches on your stepbrother's patio, attention given like grains of fried rice, hot bolts of longing splitting every moment without you into thirds. We dance to cat power, and you notice that my face looks crushed when I'm afraid, and I am afraid of how bright and lucky and quick you are to make me want you. That was a short poem. It's an exploration of love and of feeling helpless within a relationship, and feeling like you want someone more than perhaps they want you. The next poem is untitled as of yet, and it's an exploration of wanting to be in love, desiring to be desired. I want a love, terrible, soft, throat dripping, stupid with hurt at little betrayals. Eyes thick with the hair of a boy, private and strong, face cupped in new palms, barely light, red wine and enchiladas. I want to hate, with the tight salted features in Elliott Smith of someone whose world left quietly in the middle of the night. I want to be your dog, stare too hard, use my forearms as a shield, collapse the space between us in one fried heartbeat. I want to be loved, be drawn up helpless and loose against a chest, heaving with orange peel and specific size. I want to cry, lose my mind in a fragment of absence, struggle to forget even when I try, steal away to the water in golden weather. That was a poem about love and about wanting to feel safe in the arms of a person. The last poem that I'm going to read is a poem that inspired my single Eugene, which is a song that explores the complicated relationship between you and a friend. And it explores a specific kind of hurt that I think many people may have experienced. And it's called Eugene. Eugene keeps stars and split fruit between his ribs. An almost angel boy smoking loose blems, blending, worming his way into your heart. And what a heart. So soft that sometimes it hurts to beat. We've known each other for ages. The first time I came over, you grated ginger into a bowl, listened to my oldest pain, spoke like sugar water. I knew I loved you then. I'm still not quite sure in what way. Eugene bloomed, like a complicated flower or an elegant lie. You borrowed his habit of effortless bruising and horrible charm. Everybody says you look beautiful together. His hair smells of boiled blood and burnt peaches. I wear jealousy so unglamorously. It upsets my stomach. I see double, forgetting myself in the night. I was everything you needed for a minute. We would drive for miles in search of clean air. Our eyes were blind to the future, your future, with him. Who could have predicted the agony? That was a poem called Eugene that inspired my work. I think I wrote it in the middle of the night, and it was dedicated to a friend of mine who was going through a difficult situation with somebody that they loved, and the lines were beginning to blur, and it was becoming painful. Poetry is very important to me, and I'm glad that I get to share it with you guys.
Hello, welcome back. There we go. That was Arlo Parks, and she has a new single out as well. I think it's actually out this week, and it's called Black Dog, and you can go to arloparksofficial.com to find out more of that and probably download it there as well. Josie, I rudely stopped you. I allowed poetry to get in the way of your question.
Now, if you think I can remember that question from near 5 minutes ago, you are sadly mistaken, Robert.
That's how long we haven't worked together. I totally forgot about your flibbity gibbet brain. But what I find interesting is about those different narratives that we have. Like, I was thinking when I was growing up, my fears were initially rabies and some form of dystopia, because in the 70s we were brought up on a lot of strange different dystopian visions. Then throughout the 80s, it was of course nuclear war. And nuclear war did genuinely feel imminent at the time, and we would have these, it felt, and then there's a kind of a shaded area where it goes into HIV and AIDS, and so it's interesting. There's very few periods, it seems, of humanity where you actually have a period where you go, I can't see an immediate plague or end time. I think there are little patches in the 90s and a little bit in the first decade of this century, but generally there is something. And that's, I think, one of the difficulties sometimes in the way people deal with it is people can sometimes be dismissive of, say, something like climate change. They go, oh, there's always something around the corner, isn't there?
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing, isn't it? To sometimes face up to going, this is something that needs direct tackling. This is something that is worldwide. This is and how do we fight against the balance between sometimes what can be seen as an overly zealous fear of an apocalypse and a rational reaction to what could be a major problem for civilization?
Good question.
Long, wasn't it?
That's right. A useful answer to it. But yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right in saying that there's there's always something. Like there's always some reason to believe that the end is nigh, and that's part of, I think, what I'm trying to do in the book is try to be serious and engaged with the specific sort of apocalyptic energy of our time. And I'm writing mostly about climate change because I wrote it in an entire other historical era at this point. But to be sort of aware and engaged with that while also keeping one eye on the fact that it's always the end of the world. There's always, as you say, there's always something. It's always been the apocalypse, or at least it's something that drops up cyclically or whatever. And to try and not have that knowledge sort of lead you into complacency or a sense that it's always been the end of the world, but it's not the end of the world. We'll get through this just like everything else. Because the point is, I suppose, that although it's never quote unquote the apocalypse in terms of an entire existential wipeout of the human race, the whole idea of the apocalypse for me is that it's always happening somewhere.
I always think about that with The Walking Dead, where it's imagine if you weren't safe and resources were low, and it's right. So many people don't have to imagine that. It's so arrogant as a fantasy.
When we talk about preppers or people sort of buying apocalypse timeshare and luxury bunkers or whatever, and even when people like me think about the apocalypse, actually what we're thinking about is a situation which is sort of equal to how so many of the people in the world already live. like one of the things that I started to think about when I was writing the book was that, like, here I am, this like very privileged kind of person in a you know, a pretty wealthy Western country, and even as I'm walking around thinking about the apocalypse, I'm encountering, you know, Dublin has a pretty serious housing crisis and a lot of homelessness, and I'm just walking past people for whom that apocalyptic idea of like the collapse of civilization is already a reality. It's like that's the world they live in. So if I were to talk to, you know, someone like that about the idea of the collapse of civilization, they'd probably be like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean by the collapse of civilization? Is it this? Like, is this like that's what they're living? You know?" So I think it's like important to bear all that in mind while also being serious about the threat that something like climate change presents.
What for you were the most revelatory? You're traveling the world, you're seeing these different forms and ideas and philosophies of kind of, you know, of communes, etc. Were there certain moments that you felt particularly unprepared for?
Do you mean like scenarios of the end of the world, or things that I encountered in an immediate?
The actual the people themselves and their philosophies, as you were mentioning before. I mean, for some people, it's not so much about survival as maintaining a level of. It feels, again, you mentioned zombie movies. It feels like Land of the Dead, where we have Dennis Hopper very much living the kind of second Bush America, while everyone else are his kind of slaves and servants, while the zombie apocalypse goes around him. So I just wondered if there were any people you thought, wow, this is your drive is a is a very strange and peculiar drive.
Yeah, so like there's a couple instances of that, I suppose. I mean, the thing that sort of is sort of sticking out for me now is like I went to South Dakota to this very sort of remote rural area in South Dakota with this guy named Robert Vicino, who's like, I suppose you describe him as like an apocalyptic entrepreneur who specializes in like luxury survival facilities for people, sort of generally sort of wealthy Americans who are concerned about the collapse of civilization and concerned about, like, you know, civil unrest as a result of, you know, an asteroid strike or a nuclear exchange, or even something like we're going through right now. So I went to South Dakota, where he had bought this like huge dairy farm, essentially, that was like a former military munitions facility, where there were all these like massive sort of overground bunkers made from concrete and reinforced steel, and it was built during the Second World War to house bombs. And he was in the process of turning this into like what he described as a survival community for a group of like maybe 500 like-minded families or individuals. And this was the place is called X Point, and the idea is that this is like the place from which civilization will be rebuilt after a civilizational collapse. And so he was basically pitching this as kind of like apocalyptic timeshare. Basically, you buy into this scheme, you pay him like 35 grand or whatever, and you do up your bunker to your own specifications. And when the shit hits the fan, as the preppers use, you then like you get in your like heavily armored SUV or your private jet, or you get on a commercial flight or whatever, and you get yourself to South Dakota, and you sort of retreat to this area. And there's like, the plan is that there will be private army patrolling the perimeter of this place. So in a way, it's like an actual private sort of libertarian state that he is attempting to build, controlled by his own sort of private corporation or whatever. And his like vision of the end of the, I mean, it was a really interesting experience meeting him and like spending time with him, because he had my number immediately. He knew that I was like this lefty socialist European, and he knew what I wanted from him. Like, he knew what I thought of him immediately. And he's a very smart guy. He's a salesman. Like so many of the people I write about, he's a brilliant salesman, and literally like a former advertising executive. Who's made his career in like developing the field of large inflatable advertising, which is like these huge blow up things that you see on buildings or whatever. And so like my whole sort of encounter with him was him sort of trying to, in a way, like literally sell me one of these bunkers. So his approach to our encounter was like, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to reel him in somehow. I'm going to find his like weak points. I'm going to find the location of his apocalyptic anxiety, and I'm going to, sell him, and by, in consequence, sell his readers the idea of this compound and the idea of like, the apocalypse that might make it necessary. And so the whole thing was just him like stoking my anxieties and saying,
that's great, isn't it? Yeah, the apocalypse as marketing opportunity. I've got an angle. It's the end of the world.
This is so interesting to me because I feel like in the 70s, so many people set up co-ops and communes, and it's not completely dissimilar, but the root of it is so hopeful, and the root of it is appealing to people's better natures. And now it's like everyone's like, well, obviously everyone else, it's almost inbuilt into the culture, this negativity about human beings and about what should happen. Like it's so funny to me that it's like flipped,
I mean, in a way, that's what I'm trying to get at in the book, is like this conflict. Like the apocalypse is interesting to me largely because of the way in which it reveals sort of pre-existing ideological fault lines or whatever. So like the way that people like myself included, and probably you, think about the apocalypse actually reveals how we think about the world in a way. So like in the book, I write a lot about people whose vision of the end times, for want of a better term, involves like the collapse of civilization. And when they think about the apocalypse, they think about just hordes of savages, like, and they have this idea of human nature that I'm really interested in, which is like people are basically just animals. And,
but also, they never think that of them. They're always like, but not me.
Oh, yeah, no, it's like the elect. And this is why it goes back to sort of a religious sensibility as well. It's like there's going to be a small number of the elect. It's quite a sort of Calvinist idea in some ways. Yeah. There's going to be a small number of like the prepared and the elect, and they're going to be like pitted against the savages outside. And that's a really political idea. That's super right-wing. And so the sort of idea at the heart of the book, in a way, is like the conflict between a communitarian vision of how you deal with crisis, like you're talking about those 70s compounds and stuff, or compounds, communities, versus like the right-wing sort of like fortified compound. And it's not like it's the sort of the ideological kind of conflict in microcosm.
Josie, I'm going to have to stop you there because we have run out of time. No, because we've got to do a load of the Albert Hall, so we have no more time. We were meant to finish this at 11 o'clock and it's 10 past. So
it reflects inequality, because if there is a proportion of people who are very wealthy now, it reflects our society. There you go.
Yeah.
Mark's book is Notes from an Apocalypse is available now, and you should, if you can, a lot of independent bookshops go and find out about the independent bookshops that are still selling books, ordering books, and delivering books to people, because all of them they really need your help as much as possible now. Sorry, we had to cut that short, but we are going to end today on another poem from Arlo Parks. Just to remind you, we've got a new Patreon account. Please go and look at that if you can. Mark, thank you so much for. I want to talk about. I knew we'd have no time to get back to transhumanism. I thought we'd better make sure we're on your current book, but that is a fantastic book as well. Josie, 8:30 tonight, you're going to be doing your show.
My show live. Trying to make it as best live experience as I can. Come along, come and type ha 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 in the Twitch chat box so that I feel less weird doing it.
Brilliant. And so here's we're going to end with Arlo Parks, and as I said before, you can find all of the stuff at arloparksofficial.com. Thanks very much for watching. We're back tomorrow with Mark Gatiss, David McColeman, and Natalie Haynes, and there's loads of stuff.
It's going to be
great. So it's the final one of our daytime morning shows. Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
This poem is a poem that inspired my newest single, Black Dog. It's a poem about having someone you love go through a very difficult time in their heads and feeling helpless and not knowing how to lift them out of that place. It only came out a few days ago and it's had a beautiful response. It's managed to connect with people. So here's the poem that inspired that song. You promised you'd be there in the morning, and I only half believed you because the last time you said that you almost weren't. I should have forgotten that by now, but I remember. There has always been a part of you, some little agony, smooth, hot and painful, something that I could not touch. I hear the smile in your voice today, though. This loose, dark string of dark red silk, so soft, faint and rare. Where did it come from? For months, it seemed the curtains were always closed. It seemed like you were always angry at me and tired of yourself. It seemed like you wouldn't survive this, ignoring the jewel of hope behind my right eye, rolling over onto your side to crush a tear with the side of your wrist like a tiny blue flower. We were all so scared. So that was the poem that inspired Black Dog. For me, whenever I read that out, it acts as a reminder to take care of the ones you love and to check in on people. Even your happy friends, even the people that seem content, can often be going through very dark moments. I wrote a poem about happiness as well, inspired by poems by Jordan Stevens, one of my good friends. So it goes like this. Happiness is the garnet stone in her bracelet, an elbow through the skin of pool water. Happiness was a line, a hand, 2 eyes, spidery lashed and full of tequila. Happiness is everything you could never get enough of. Why couldn't you just let things sit? Always hungry for instinct, immediacy, a vacuum of patience. Stew in your juices, cry until you're finished. Drink slowly, move fast. Happiness will come when she's ready. Twin sister of joy, full and gold and always next door. Grief spins in the bowl of your belly. When something inside starts to scream, remember. 2 kisses and 1 camera. 4 hands and 6 tattoos. You felt happy and lucky, saw stars every night for 2 weeks. That was a poem about happiness. I think it's important to think about gratitude in this time. Think about what makes you happy. Keep tabs on people, situations, songs, art that makes you feel full and alive. That's what I've been doing. The last poem that I'm going to read for you guys is a poem about magic. I was asked to write a poem trying to convince someone who didn't believe in magic that it did exist. So I wrote a list of things that to me are magical. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a pleasure. I'm Arlo Parks. A flower shattered and dark red at the bottom of a pocket. A kiss quick and bright between the shoulder blades. The perfect white Russian, sipped in the blurred gloom of a not-so-promising bar. The brilliant corners of a mind in pain. A stranger not quite understanding, but taking the time to listen. A child offering up a cherry to me, face entirely full of light in the dying hours of Market Sunday. Dancing in kitchens, bathrooms, streets, to any jazz at all. Finding something small and sacred that makes you kinder to yourself after all these years of not being so kind. Tears of joy flowering at the eyelids, pale blue eyes and special trees. The words, I love you, being followed by the tender solid of I love you too. How can you tell me that you don't believe in magic now? This has been a beautiful experience. Thank you very much for having me. I hope you managed to glean something from the pieces that I read out, and I hope everyone's doing all right.